Welcome back to the Speaking and Communicating podcast. I am your host, Roberta. If you are looking for a space to improve your communication skills, both professionally and personally, this is the podcast for you. Today, I am joined by Catherine Mattice, who is the CEO and founder of Civility Partners. Now, get this. She coaches leaders on how to deal with workplace bullying and toxic work environments. Now, before I go any further, please help me welcome Catherine.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Catherine, I've heard of so many coaches, I'll be honest, all different types. And just when I thought I've heard them all, you come with workplace bullying and toxic environment coaching. What is that about?
Yeah. So, I'll tell you how I started doing it. I was the director of HR for a company that had one toxic leader in it. And we were peers, me and this toxic leader. And while I was working there, I ended up doing grad school and did all of my graduate research on workplace bullying. And so that's where I have a ton of knowledge in that area and continue to read and research and walk that academic line, as well as consulting and coaching around it. So Civility Partners was born as a result of those experiences and wanting to solve the problem of workplace bullying. And over time, we've moved into more just wanting to build a positive work environment. But I do specialize in executive coaching for toxic leaders who engage in bullying behaviors and who are, making people feel unsafe and unhealthy at work. And we also do lots of trainings around various topics related to positive work environments. And thirdly, we do a lot of workforce surveys, and then we work with leaders to turn the culture around.
Right. So you say you've been reading up on the topic and researching it for years. Mm-hmm. Are you saying that they actually do admit that this is a toxic work environment?
Unfortunately, a lot of our clients come out of desperation. So if we're doing a workforce survey or culture change work, often that is born out of some sort of Me Too moment where there was some public, issue that happened, or before the Great Resignation or Great Reshuffle, obviously, people leaving was a sign that something was wrong with our culture. So often there's something that's happening that causes the leaders to say, well, what's happening? We need to figure it out. So yeah, they have to be willing to admit that something's wrong and they need help.
And so if I'm an employee, I've got supervisors and directors above me, and I experience what I feel like I'm being bullied. Mm-hmm. Do you find that in your research, are people brave enough and courageous enough to go to HR? What's the first thing that they do? First of all, let's start there. What's the first thing that they do when they feel like they're being bullied?
The first thing is actually coming out of a state of confusion. So often bullying is insidious and it happens over time. And it's like this wake up realization of, oh my gosh, I think I'm being abused at work. And, just like a domestic violence, it often escalates over time where the person's getting more and more controlling, and then it explodes into physical violence. And so there's that same kind of an element. So that's the first thing, is recognizing this isn't right. And I don't understand what's happening. And I think I need some help here. And as adults, we don't expect to go to work and be bullied. That's stuff that's supposed to happen when you're a kid.
It's a middle school thing.
Yeah. So I think the second thing someone who's being bullied does is scan the environment and try to figure out what might the reaction be with HR or their manager or supervisor if they were to tell someone about it. And so organizations, this is where the culture work comes in. Organizations have to be clear that they would support people who report things like bullying or harassment. And so if I'm thinking, gosh, well, the guy in marketing is kind of a bully and he still works here and no one's ever addressed him, then I'm probably not going to report it, because I can see that that type of behavior is not addressed anyways. So that's the unfortunate thing, is employers need to be more open and transparent, that they know what bullying is and they're interested in stopping it if they hear of it.
I can certainly attest to that, because a lot of people are afraid to lose their jobs, obviously. So if you scan, as you say, you scan the room and you realize, hey, wait a minute, that guy gets away with it every time. He must be important in the company. If anything, if I report this, I could be the one to get fired, and I'm being bullied.
Yep.
So do you find that quite a number of employees that's their experience, that's their fear?
Unfortunately, yeah. And it's pretty common for the person to be let go and the person who's doing the bullying to stay. That's unfortunately a pretty common thing.
So it depends on what are some of the factors that it depends on? Is it a hierarchy thing?
I think it's a couple of things. So one is from an HR perspective, if someone comes to me and I'm in a big organization and I need to be able to prove to my leadership that this is a real problem and it's costing money and causing damage to the organization, the person who's complaining to me about the bullying needs to help me make that case to my leaders. HR doesn't have free will just to fire people or have performance conversations. And so if you do feel bullied, my advice would be that when you talk to HR, you really come at it as if you're making a business case or sharing a presentation about an idea you have. That you have to approach it from a business place. Obviously it's a very emotional thing to go through, but saying I'm hurt and kind of leaning on your emotions as the case, I'm hurt, so we need to change. Unfortunately, it's not that HR is heartless. It's just that HR needs more to go on around.
Right. They can't work with just emotion. Just like when you go to court, you need to present evidence.
Yeah, exactly. So I would recommend keeping a journal, and I wouldn't do it on your work computer, but keeping a written journal and again, it has to be facts-based, as emotional as it is. And I'm not discounting that, but to, keep track of the who, what, when, where, and what happened and who was there, who saw, and what time was it, what meeting was it at, and what happened. And then you could go to HR and say, look, I've been kind of monitoring this for a few months. Here's what I've been seeing. Here are the ways that I've already tried to resolve it, because I'm a problem solver and I'm a good employee, but I'm just not able to solve it. And that's why I'm here in your office. I'm seeking sort of next level support. That's a better version than I haven't tried to stop it. I don't know what to do. Please help me.
Let's first explain it, because as you talk, I'm thinking of the difference between, let's say it's a deadline and there's something you needed to give me for the final report that I'm supposed to send, and you are delaying me. If I just call you on the phone in extension and say, Catherine, where's that letter now? And I just hang up the phone and I slam it on your ear. Or, how can you do this? You're so useless. Some people, that's just their mannerisms. I'm not saying it's good. Or is there a line? How do people know this is just this person being under pressure, or this is this person bullying me? How can you do this? You know that they wanted it last. How can when I lose it and I say things that I would say to anybody when I lose it, is that bullying, or is it just me being who I am?
Well, that's it. The way you've positioned the question is interesting. So it is not bullying if it happens one time. We're all under stress. I missed something and you've got something due to a client or what have you, and you freak out on me. No, that's not bullying. If you do it all the time, whether it's over something big or because I was a minute late to a meeting, then it's a different story. So it is about the pattern. And so the way that you can look at bullying behaviors is that they occur in 3 categories. And I always see those 3 categories together. So the first is aggressive communication, like what you just described, yelling and then slamming the phone down, nasty emails, aggressive body language, so aggressive communication is the first. The second category of behavior is humiliation. So if you were to scream at me and call out my mistakes in front of others, then that would be an example of humiliation, or bringing it up in meetings and things in front of others. And then thirdly is manipulation. So if you, using your example, if you gave me an assignment right now, it's 4:23 p.m. and you told me it's due by 5, and it's actually the type of project that takes, 6 or 8 hours to do, then that would be manipulating me. And again, it's a pattern. So if you did that one time, oh my gosh, Catherine, this is due, we got to get it done. Can you work late? Yeah, that's different than consistently setting
always waiting to the last minute to just make your life miserable. Yeah. So aggressive communication, humiliation, and
manipulation.
Okay. So if usually it will fall into those categories if you are actually being bullied versus I'm just dealing with a terrible person. That's just how my coworker is.
Yeah. Well, that's why I said that was interesting, because I do, when I coach these people, sometimes I hear, well, that's just how they are, or one woman I coached, she's just passionate. But I don't think that excuses the behavior. If it's causing a lot of hurt, it needs to be addressed. So when I use the word bullying, I'm referring to behavior that fits in those 3 categories. But even someone who's maybe constantly kind of aggressively sarcastic, or walks the line of microaggressions, or even says those sorts of other lower level behaviors that we don't often address, we can't say, well, that's just how their sense of humor is. If they're actually causing harm, it may not be bullying, and it's certainly not illegal, but aggressive sarcasm or inappropriate sarcasm can be hurtful. And you can't just say, well, that's just their sense of humor. Well, no, it's hurting.
It does affect other people. You're right. So in those instances, do those in leadership positions address that, or they just think I'm too busy? They'll just have to deal with Catherine. That's just how she is. Or do they think this is a problem we need to address? I must bring it into my office and say, hey, wait a minute. This may be your personality, but this is a work environment. You can do that at home, or something like that.
I think so one thing I notice when I go into organizations is middle management has rarely, I find, been trained that if you hear gossip or inappropriate behavior, that's that lower level stuff, incivility. Rarely do I go into organizations where managers have been trained on how to solve that type of behavior, how to coach people who engage in that behavior, and also have not been told that that's the expectation. So you get people running around acting out with nobody taking accountability for addressing it. So there is that. And I do really think that if managers had that training, it would save us all a world of hurt. When it comes to the higher level people who I'm coaching, these individuals are often executives, or they've been with the organization for a long time. They're higher level. And in those instances, the leaders may be very well aware of how much damage they're causing with that bullying behavior, but they're not interested in solving it because they see this person as really valuable.
Or valuable, or maybe the company was funded by their father.
Right.
Or they play golf with the father.
Right. Yeah. They either bring in a bunch of money, or they have a lot of organizational knowledge, or they know people. They're somebody's brother. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So the bottom line becomes more important than the human aspect.
Yes.
And therefore, when it comes to, we were talking earlier about being afraid for your job in case you report it to HR and it's brought to you. So your clients, you're saying they're upper level management.
The coaching clients, yeah.
The clients that you coach. When you first bring this to them, first of all, are they even willing to admit that there's this type of problem? Or do they think, hey, wait a minute, we got lots of work to do. We don't have
time. By the time I get to them, I've already coached, I use that word loosely. I've already had some conversations with the leadership who are going to be accountable to holding my coaching client accountable about how to talk about it. So they're, I'm not showing up like, hi, I'm your new executive coach. When I show up, they've been told you have to change. And if you don't change, we need to put a consequence in place. And we have a coach to help ensure that we don't have to put that consequence in place. So it is a bit of disciplinary, I'm sure it feels like, with the coaching client. And they are often kind of like, oh, I know I can be hard, or I know, some people, I remember I made Susan cry, but, she's sensitive, so they kind of discount it all. And then I go around and interview people, and then I present that data to them. And so I take, rather than, HR kind of saying, well, people say that you yell, which is kind of hearsay. It's hard to buy that if you believe in your leadership style. But if I come in and say, look, I interviewed 15 people, I put all of the interview notes into themes. And hey, one theme is that you yell, and here's, 20 bullet points of people literally saying that. It's not just HR telling you to pipe down. It's people actually think you yell. So when I give that feedback there, that's usually a big turning point where they are often quite mortified that that's how they're perceived. They didn't know it was so bad.
Right. So it's an awareness exercise.
Yeah.
And as you said earlier, it's about a pattern. I mean, the fact that there are 20 people saying the same thing, something must be in there. There's no smoke without fire.
Right.
And so are they open to listening to your coaching, or are they a little hostile at the beginning?
Yeah, it depends. Some of them are very open. Often, it's like, oh my gosh, help me. If this is how people see me, I need your help, and they're very open. Others, it takes me a few sessions to talk them into that feedback being real. So they're still trying to separate themselves. They'll say things like, oh, I think some of the people you talk to probably, I haven't talked to them in a while, so they're kind of invalidating it, or, oh, I don't do that. Yeah, that's not true. Or they'll pick out one or two bullet points. That's not true. That never happened. And so I have to, the trick there is to say, well, okay, maybe those few things didn't happen, or maybe you don't think you yell, but you got 15 or 20 people who say you do. And so as an outsider, I got to buy the 15 to 20 people. Their realities seems to align, and yours doesn't align, or sometimes I'll just say, look, I don't know what the facts are, but the fact is I have, a 15 or 20 page document that says this is how you're perceived. So you have to decide if you care about that or not. It doesn't really matter what happened. I don't operate in facts. I don't do investigations. I just want to know how you're perceived. And this is how you're perceived. So and you decide if you don't want to be perceived. Yeah, if you don't want to be perceived this way, I'm here to help. But if you don't care, then we can call off the coaching. I'm not interested in forcing you to be here. I don't want to be here either, if that's the case.
Right. Does it afterwards create an awkward situation at work? Once they know that everybody around them has been telling this coach that, hey, this person yells at us and is toxic and bullies us?
I would imagine that the person I'm coaching is pretty uncomfortable once they get that feedback from me, because now they know how they're really seen. And they just, I think, get quiet because they're probably embarrassed, and they kind of keep their head down. But when we talk about that, I'll tell them, look, they've been talking about this for a long time. It's not that I asked a question and it finally all came out. I was hired because they were already talking about it. So let's change the conversation. If people are gossiping about you, why not have them gossip about how you've improved and you're a better leader, and they, aren't afraid of you anymore. So that's kind of the angle I take there.
Right. Do you think it's a power play thing sometimes? And I asked because I remember I have a friend who told me, she's also in HR in a company. And she told me the story earlier in the year. She said, there's this guy, I think he's been with the company for about 20 years. He calls people idiots and jerks. And I said, and every time they report to them in HR, I said, but why aren't you doing anything about it? And she said to me, he's the only one who knows how to operate that part of the warehouse. I said, that is entirely your company's fault. How can you have, if something happened to him tomorrow, God forbid, how can you have someone who's the only one who knows how to operate a certain system? You cannot have that. So he
Right.
knows that. He knows the leverage he has on this company. He gets to call people whatever names that come to his mind, and he doesn't care.
Well, and that's the thing. He's also not irreplaceable. Somebody else can learn it. And if something did happen to him tomorrow, the company would figure it out. And so he's exactly the kind of person that I coach. He's seen as super valuable because he knows something that nobody else knows, apparently. But I don't take coaching clients unless the company has put a consequence in place. And sometimes that's the difficult part. I can already foresee a sales call with the CEO of that company. I don't want to put a consequence in place because I'm not willing to pull the trigger if I need to use it. And then I won't take that coaching client on.
Right.
The company has to be willing to hold this person accountable.
And is it the company leadership's fault to make a particular employee that indispensable? So
Yes.
we know that they can be replaced, but some people are made to feel that way.
Yep. Yes, it's the company's fault, and they should have addressed it a long time ago. The first time he's called someone an idiot, they should have said, we don't tolerate that here. Don't do that again. But here we are 20 years later, he's probably been acting that way for the last 17 of them, and that's also why the consequence is important, because if the owner goes to this person and says, you can't act that way anymore, I got you a coach, they're going to think, why not? Sure, I'll go through coaching. I'll just go back to the way it was. So, because you obviously don't care. Right. So part of that consequence is the messaging, just to make it clear that you do have to change. This is not a futile exercise where we're spending a bunch of money and your time, but yeah, sometimes, in fact, I'm in the process of probably letting a coaching client go because the CEO's just not giving that consequence. And I was under the impression it had been given, and it has not. And I can't work miracles. Why would he change?
So the executive leadership has to have a backbone for you to be able to continue to work with that company.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're just a bad cop.
Yep. And it doesn't go well. It makes me look bad. It's just a mess. I don't take clients unless there's a consequence in place.
Right. Have you found in your research and in your coaching experience that there's a certain gender that's more likely to bully, or it makes no difference? Both genders.
I've seen research that it's 60-40, men 60% of the time, females 40% of the time. I would say that's about accurate based on my coaching, my pool of clients over the last years. One thing that's interesting is that I hate to stereotype women, but this is what I've experienced. They cry in my coaching meetings a lot. And so that's fascinating to me, just because people are so afraid of them. But here they are, talking to me, and they're really upset and sad, and
emotional creatures, Catherine.
Yeah, we are. The other thing I'll say too is often it's the organization that's, in addition to allowing this person to act this way, there's things happening in the organization that sort of facilitate that bad behavior. So often, for using your example of this guy who can operate the one thing in the manufacturing
by himself,
yeah, perhaps he's frustrated because the system is slow, or he's made suggestions for improvement and they're not heard, or there's probably things frustrating for him that he's not getting resolved. And so it's not that these people are horrible people. I do often find that there's organizational problems that cause frustration and stress. And that's partly where it's coming from. Just they're frustrated and burned out.
That makes perfect sense, because have you realized, even at home, when you're frustrated, who do you take it out on? The people nearest to you.
Yep.
Exactly. So that's right. If the organization is guilty of not solving whatever problem they're facing, they'll take it out on the next person sitting on the cubicle.
Exactly. Exactly.
And then when it comes to the sensitive issue of race, what has been your experience when is there bullying that is race related in some of your coaching clients? Or it's just pure human beings just being who they are?
Yeah, sometimes it comes up. So I'm coaching someone right now who's works in a very global $12 billion company. He's in India. His lots of the people he talks to throughout the day are in America. There's a cultural difference there. I don't know if that's race so much as just his culture is different. It's a very kind of machismo in the India culture, not so much, so there's that. But I can, some other examples, for example, this woman who also happened to be from India, it's not trying to pick on that particular group, but she felt, she was one of the only people of color there at this organization. And she was very open about her feelings around race and would call people out if she felt that some conversation was had or a decision was made. And that some of it had to do with their race. And so there was one example was she had asked to have an assistant and was told no. And her response to the CEO was, if I was white, you would have said yes. And so
Can I interrupt you with a question on that?
Sure.
Is there someone in the organization on the same position who has an assistant?
Well, she already had one. She had a team, so it wasn't so yes, and that was a very large nonprofit. It was, it was worth millions of dollars. It was a large nonprofit. So, but it was very white, according to her. And she would talk to me about how they had recently hired, as many organizations did with Me Too, a diversity, equity, and inclusion, or chief. I think that person was chief DEI, and they would talk about how he would talk to her about how much work he had to do in this very white organization. And he also felt not heard. And so I'm not discounting. It's certainly very possible.
It does exist, yes.
Yeah.
And I've always felt that because I've also been on both sides as well. I find that if every single time you start with your sentence with the exact same, people become tone deaf. And even on situations that merit that accusation that it's because it's a racial thing, people will become tone deaf and think, oh, every time Catherine opens them up, that's exactly what she thinks. Every time she's going to think that. So is there a way to actually establish that, yes, had she been a different race, she would have gotten the assistant she wanted, because in that position, you need to have an assistant?
Yeah. And that was what we talked about in coaching, is that, and she had a pretty good relationship with the CEO, and maybe that's why she felt comfortable to say it that way. But we talked about, absolutely, it's certainly possible that the bias got in the way, and you should talk to your CEO about it. But the way that you went about it in front of, other directors and all of that maybe wasn't the right way. So I'm white. I'm not here to coach people of color on how to, talk about race for sure. But what I do know is kind of what you were just saying, that if you use it in an aggressive way, if you're kind of throwing it out there aggressively every time something doesn't go your way, then people become tone deaf and defensive. And so we talked in coaching about, could you have had that conversation with the CEO in a different way? Could you have had a private meeting with him to say, here's my perspective. I see other people at my level with assistants, and kind of make a case, versus kind of what we were saying earlier. If you feel bullied,
not
it's emotional, but you got to make the case.
Evidence in court. Yes, because then it makes more sense. The logic will follow. Even the person listening will say, hey, wait a minute. Every time somebody's been in this position before, they've had an assistant. Why didn't we give it to her? Wait a minute, let's look. Every time we've had this person in this position, they were white. She's the first Indian one, and she doesn't get an assistant. You see, I can follow the logic.
Right.
And even the person who's being accused of playing the race card, they can actually realize there's a discrepancy in
Right.
these situations. What's going on here?
Right.
But if
You
every
just
time
can't be
you
accusatory of
Mm.
basically calling the CEO a racist in front of other people, that's not going to work.
They could have had a private conversation, as you say, like
Yeah.
you said, start to study the patterns, write down and say, hey, wait a minute, every time this happens, I'm treated differently. If you start to recognize the patterns, just like you recognize the pattern of the person calling you an idiot every time they speak to you on the phone or
Right.
things
Right.
like that. But yeah, it's not anything that, if you think of even being in a relationship or husband and wife situation, every time you nag about something, they just say, oh yeah, she's like that. They don't even take you seriously anymore.
Yep.
If a lot
Yep.
of the time you just say it for the sake of saying it and the situation does not warrant that being the case.
Right, right. And I mean, we talked too about we've got this new chief of DEI, maybe bring him into the conversation with you that remind the CEO, hey, you did hire someone because you care about this. And these are the types of things that happen if we're not thinking about DEI, that our bias can get in the way of our decision making. There was definitely a lot of other ways she could have gone about it. And so it became a bully. I mean, it was like one of her bullying tactics was to use race. And so that's where I've seen it. But it doesn't come up a lot. It's not, I coach people around the world. I've coached a guy in France. If people are really if the person who's engaging in bullying is being an overt racist, that's discrimination and harassment. And so that's an illegal problem, and that's more easily solved. Yeah.
You mentioned the word harassment before we close.
Yeah.
Is bullying does it fall under the sexual harassment umbrella, or is that a separate topic altogether?
Here's my own answer. The law probably would not agree with me. I see workplace bullying as an overarching phrase that describes any sort of toxic bullying, abusive behavior, be it harassment, discrimination, equal opportunity, behavior. The difference, according to the law, is who you aim that at. So if I only bully people of color or gay or certain nationalities or whatever, then that becomes illegal harassment. But so I kind of joke, the loophole, if you're going to be an ass at work, is to just be an ass to everyone. And you're all red. There's the loophole.
That's right.
Yeah. And that's kind of the pattern around the world. It's not just in America. It's I think as a world, we're trying to figure out how do we draw the lines between some of the things you were talking about earlier. Someone has a bad day and they, let out some aggression and stress versus this ongoing pattern. Where's the line? How do we manage the differences? A lot of it's perspective and perception. So, but that's my answer. Bullying and harassment and sexual harassment, they're all it's the same behaviors. It's abuse. It's designed to have power over others. But according to the law, who you aim it at is when it becomes illegal or not.
And then the technicalities kick in.
Yeah.
Catherine, this has been such a huge eye opener. Like, I didn't even know, like I said, there was a toxic workplace environment, coach.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed chatting with you.
Yeah, this has been wonderful. Now, just before you go, you said with the Great Resignation, do you find that that's one of the main reasons there's been this Great Resignation, other than just COVID and everything moving online?
Yeah, I've seen plenty of research from, global consulting firms such as Pew or Boston Consulting Group that what they're finding in their research around the world is that people leave because of a toxic environment or pay. Those are kind of the two main things. So I do think with this move towards more virtual work and remote work, that people aren't going to feel so inclined to stay at an abusive company because it's a little easier to job hunt these days with not having to stay in your same city while you're job hunting. So
Right. And do you think being virtual makes the bullying any less, or it makes no difference?
I think it's possible it's more, because if I used to yell in the hallway and other people heard me, now I can yell at you in a Zoom call and other people can't hear me.
Gonna get less. Listen to me being an optimist.
I am too. I have hope, but I do think employees are over time, they're just going to keep taking back the workplace more and more, or maybe not taking it back. The workplace has gone from more toxic over time to less and less toxic. And I think we'll keep moving that direction.
Hopefully so. Before you go, please tell us where to find you so that if we need your services, we'll know where to go.
Yeah, anywhere and everywhere. My website is civilitypartners.com. You can look me up on LinkedIn and Facebook and all the things, Twitter.
Everywhere. All the interwebs.
Yes, exactly.
Catherine Mattice, Civility Partners. If you have a toxic work environment or experience workplace bullying, please contact her. And last words before we go, Catherine, what motto do you live by?
It's an employer's responsibility to create an environment where people can thrive and where they feel good. And that's my mission in life, is to see to it that employers fulfill that ethical responsibility.
Thank you very much.